There was a time in my life when being overlooked felt like a routine part of the day. I'm Ethan, a 29-year-old guy who works the night shift at a small-town convenience station. It's the kind of gig where you swipe lotto tickets, pump gas, and deal with inebriated customers at ungodly hours. It's not glamorous, not exciting, and definitely not something my so-called family brags about. Except when they're pretending it doesn't exist. 5 years ago, everything changed. My parents, the only real foundation I had in this world, were killed in a tragic car accident. It blindsided me and left a void I wasn't prepared to handle. Along with the emotional wreckage, they left behind their home and a savings account they'd worked decades to build. Their attorney, a meticulous man named Harold, arranged for it to be placed in a trust, and I was named the manager. Not the owner, but the gatekeeper. I didn't realize then just how much power that role would eventually give me. At first, I used the trust as anyone might expect, maintaining the house, covering basic legal and funeral costs. But soon after, members of my extended family came sniffing around like vultures spotting fresh roadkill. My Aunt Diane, now 52, and her husband Greg, 54, had always been the type to flash smiles at you while keeping a dagger just out of sight. Their sons, Tyler and Jason, 27 and 25 respectively, weren't any better. Entitled, arrogant, and completely delusional about the effort it took to live comfortably. They all lived as though they'd struck gold through hard work. The truth is, I was footing most of their bills. Nearly 70% of Diane and Greg's mortgage was quietly covered by transfers I arranged. The tropical getaways? On my dime. The shiny leased cars they showed off at every family gathering? Again, my contributions. They never once questioned the source, assuming it was some kind of governmental survivor benefit for families affected by tragedy. I let them believe that. Correcting them felt unnecessary. And honestly, I found a dark kind of satisfaction in watching them puff up their chests, completely oblivious to the reality. Meanwhile, I kept my lifestyle grounded. I drove a battered 2009 Honda Civic that wheezed every time I hit 55 miles per hour. My wardrobe consisted of 5 rotation-worn t-shirts, 3 pairs of jeans, and a scuffed pair of sneakers I'd repaired with duct tape more than once. But this wasn't because I was broke. No, it was because my parents taught me value. The real kind. They instilled in me the importance of saving, of thinking long-term, of living beneath your means. And unlike my relatives, I actually listened. A couple of weeks ago, I joined my extended family for dinner at their suburban mini-mansion. I walked into the foyer holding a steaming tray of homemade lasagna, a family recipe passed down from my mother. Before I could even set it down, I overheard Diane scoffing to Jason. At least someone in this family understands what it means to enjoy life. Her eyes landed on me with a look that was half pity, half scorn. The meal began as expected. Greg regaled us with tales of his exclusive country club escapades. Tyler proudly demonstrated his brand new smartwatch. Jason couldn't stop gushing about the front row seats he scored for some overpriced music festival. All of it, every last bit, funded by me. And yet not one of them saw the irony in flaunting wealth they never earned. Then came the dagger, cloaked in sweetness. Diane leaned forward, swirling her wine glass like she was about to deliver a toast. "Ethan, sweetheart, don't you think it's time you pursued a real career? Your father always knew how to present himself. He was never content to just coast through life." I didn't flinch. I simply took another bite of the very lasagna she'd complimented moments earlier, under the assumption it was store-bought, because in her mind, I couldn't possibly cook anything that good or afford decent ingredients. Jason, ever the golden boy, chuckled and added, "Not everyone can be successful, Mom. Ethan's doing his best." His best? The nerve of it made my blood simmer. I wanted to shout, to scream that I had bankrolled his lifestyle from the shadows. That his concert tickets, his new phone, even the shirt on his back were courtesy of my silent generosity. Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, they started excitedly discussing their upcoming Cancun vacation. A 5-star resort stay, booked with a credit card, is being paid off monthly by the trust account I managed. Naturally, I hadn't been invited. Not that I wanted to go, but the exclusion wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, and it stung more than I'd admit. Greg raised his glass for a toast. "Here's to those of us who work hard enough to deserve the finer things." He said it with such smugness that I had to look away. But Diane wasn't done. She looked directly at me and said, "You know, Ethan, you'll always be a nobody, just like your dad was, until luck finally smiled on him." The air thickened. Even Tyler and Jason shifted uncomfortably. My father wasn't lucky. He was brilliant. He started from nothing and built a legacy that they now leech off. And they dared call it luck. I finished my meal without a word, excused myself with the excuse of an early shift, and walked out. As I reached the hallway, I heard Diane snicker. Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for poor Ethan. That was the last straw. My mind was ablaze, but I didn't let it show. I stepped outside, leaned against the car, and pulled out my phone. I opened the trust account and began making a few calls. The next morning, the quiet revenge began. They had no clue that their fantasy world, the illusion of wealth and effortlessness, was about to be shattered. I'd let them float along for 5 years. That mercy was about to run out. But before I could fully execute my plan, something unexpected happened. A few nights later, during another slow graveyard shift at the station, a beat-up car limped into the lot around 11 p.m. The driver, a woman with tired eyes and a flat tire, stepped out with a calm determination. That's how I met Jessica. She was stunning, not in a polished Instagram model way, but in a real, take-your-breath-away kind of way. She didn't act like she was above anyone. There was no entitlement, no judgment. She was a kindergarten teacher, as it turned out. Someone who spent her days surrounded by chaos and crayons, and somehow still found joy in it. As I changed her tire, she laughed at my awkward jokes, not out of pity but with genuine amusement. When I handed her the tire iron back, she smiled and asked for my number. Me, just a night clerk in a greasy uniform. We started dating shortly after, and those 2 months with her became the brightest chapter I'd had in years. Jessica didn't care about brands or luxury. She drove an old Corolla that made my Civic look elegant. She split rent with a roommate to save money and found joy in little things. Our dates were cheap, $5.00 pizza, movie nights on my couch, long drives just to talk, but they were perfect. For the first time since my parents' accident, I felt truly seen. Eventually another Sunday rolled around, and like clockwork, my family sent their usual dinner invite. But this time, I brought Jessica. I warned her ahead of time, tried to prepare her for the circus she was walking into. Still, nothing could have braced either of us for what unfolded. The moment we stepped through the door, Diane's eyes swept over Jessica, her simple sundress, her canvas purse, and just like that, the smile on Diane's face tightened. Like she smelled something sour, but had to be polite about it. "Oh, Ethan, you didn't mention you were bringing a guest," Diane announced the moment we stepped through the front door, her voice laced with an exaggerated surprise that dripped with sarcasm. She emphasized the word guest, the way someone might talk about a stray cat wandering into a wedding. Her eyes flicked over Jessica's outfit with polite disdain. A simple sundress, modest heels, and a purse that definitely wasn't designer. Diane looked as though she were trying to decode how someone like Jessica had ended up with someone like me. Uncle Greg, as predictable as ever, didn't even look up from his phone. "Hey kid, extra chairs are in the garage," he mumbled. "Nothing like a warm welcome, right?" I walked out to grab the chairs, leaving Jessica in the lion's den. When I returned a few minutes later, my heart sank. Tyler had claimed the seat next to her, flashing his phone screen and enthusiastically showing off photos from his most recent trip to Hawaii. "I go there twice a year," he boasted, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. "Maybe next time, you could come with better company, of course," he added a wink and gave me a smug grin that made my fists clench. Jessica gave an awkward laugh and shuffled slightly toward me when I slid into the seat beside her. Under the table, I reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze, silently apologizing for throwing her into this mess. Dinner started shortly after, and just like that, it began. What I can only describe as a systematic dismantling of my dignity, dressed up as conversation. Every time Jessica tried to bring up something nice about our relationship, my family twisted it into a jab. "Jen took me to this cute little Italian place last weekend," she said brightly, clearly trying to join the conversation and bring some levity to the table. "Oh, Salvatore's?" Diane cackled. "That's where we take the kids for pizza and ice cream after birthday parties." She took a sip of wine and added with a fake pout, "Surprised Ethan could afford even that on his gas station wages." I felt Jessica's grip loosen slightly. Her smile wavered. That tiny crack in her armor felt like a knife in my chest. Jason, not one to be left out, jumped in. "Did Ethan tell you he's been at that gas station for what, 4 years now? No promotions, no plans, no real ambition to speak of?" Before I could speak, Jessica interjected, her tone firm but calm. "I actually think that kind of consistency is admirable. Not everyone's chasing titles. He's dependable, and his customers clearly appreciate him." Tyler nearly choked on his drink, laughing. "Appreciated by whom? Drunk truck drivers grabbing beef jerky at 2 a.m.? Yeah, real prestige, bro." I tried to steer the conversation somewhere else, but they weren't done with us yet. "So, Jessica," Uncle Greg said, setting his fork down and turning his full attention to her. "You teach kindergarten, right? That's adorable. Meanwhile, Tyler here just made junior partner at his firm. Got himself a brand new Mercedes to celebrate." Jessica raised her eyebrows, genuinely impressed despite herself. "Wow, congratulations. That's a big milestone." Tyler beamed. "Well, what can I say? Some of us have goals." The digs didn't stop. They brought up how my car had supposedly broken down multiple times last year. Completely false. Then Uncle Greg claimed I still owed him money from some loan, which was also a lie. He was the one who'd borrowed from me. They even joked that I probably couldn't afford to take Jessica anywhere decent for her birthday, painting a cartoonish image of me as this permanently broken underachiever. All the while Jessica kept holding my hand under the table, but her eyes, they were beginning to change. She looked around at the pristine house, the gleaming marble countertops, the tailored outfits, and the diamond-studded watches. And then she looked at me, the gas station clerk in a discount button-up and worn-out sneakers. Finally, Diane struck the final blow. "Jessica, sweetheart," she said with a syrupy smile that masked pure venom. "You seem like such a lovely young woman. Beautiful, educated. Tell me honestly, what exactly do you see in our Ethan? I mean, he's a good boy, but he's never going to give you the kind of life you deserve, right?" You could have heard a pin drop. Jessica's face flushed bright red. She tried to gather herself and replied, barely above a whisper, "I think Ethan has a lot to offer." But I saw it, the doubt, the crack that was now a fissure. The rest of the evening passed in a fog. We left early. The car ride was nearly silent. When we pulled up to her place, she just said she had a headache and needed to rest. No kiss, no lingering goodbye. She didn't even look back as she walked inside. Over the next few days, I felt her slipping away. Her texts became infrequent, short, robotic. Calls that used to stretch for hours were now cut off within minutes. The good morning messages disappeared. The goodnight ones followed soon after. And then, the final dinner. We met at her apartment like we always did. Normally we'd eat cheap Chinese, mock each other's chopstick skills, watch some ridiculous sitcom reruns, and just laugh. But that night, she was distant. Barely spoke. Her eyes kept drifting to her phone every few minutes. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just stuff at work," she muttered, not meeting my gaze. I knew it wasn't work. She had never let work interrupt our time before. Something had changed. I just couldn't figure out what. That weekend, she canceled on me last minute, said she had plans with old friends. She didn't invite me, didn't even ask if I minded. Then came the text. "I think we need some space." She needed to sort things out. She wasn't sure if we were aligned. Said the dinner with my family had opened her eyes. 2 weeks passed. I was scrolling through Instagram, not even thinking about her. When I saw it, there she was. Jessica, smiling at a rooftop bar, cocktail in hand, dressed like she belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine. Sitting beside her was Tyler, his arm draped over the back of her chair. The caption on his post read, "Upgraded her taste in men." I stared, the blood drained from my face. I could have smashed my phone, stormed into that place, flipped the table and caused a scene. But I didn't. Because I realized something important. Anger is loud, but revenge is patient. Revenge waits. Later, Jason, surprisingly, gave me the missing piece. "Tyler got in her head, man. Told her you're a great guy, but you're just stuck. Said she deserves someone who can give her more than late-night pizza and hiking trails. Said it's okay to want more." And Jessica had bought it. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at that Instagram post until the screen dimmed. 5 years of sacrificing for these people, carrying their burdens and hiding my own strength, and they still tried to tear me down, to take everything. But Tyler thought he had won, that he'd gotten the girl, scored the victory, and humiliated me in one move. He didn't know what was coming. I picked up the phone, dialed my financial advisor. "Remember that plan we discussed?" I asked. "Ha! It's time." When I spoke with my financial advisor, his voice was lined with hesitation. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked, his tone low and measured. "Once we start, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied calmly. "They've taken everything else from me, my time, my peace, even someone I cared about. They don't get to take my dignity, too." This wasn't about Jessica anymore. Not really. That ship had sailed the moment she let herself be swept into the illusion my family built with my money. No, This was about 5 years of quiet exploitation, years where I had allowed them to live lavishly while I blended into the background, like I didn't matter. They'd played rich on my dime, and now it was time for them to face reality. I sat down that night and pulled up every financial document I had access to. It was all there, clearer than ever. The numbers were staggering. Seeing it all laid out like that, line by line, made me feel like I was looking at a crime scene, only I was the victim. Their 5-bedroom home in the affluent part of town, that ran $1,196.00 a month, like clockwork, withdrawn straight from the trust fund. They never once stopped to ask where the money came from, not one question. As if government subsidies for orphaned adults covered mortgages for half a decade. Who seriously believes that? Uncle Greg's precious golf membership, his networking expense as he called it, cost $375.00 every single month. He justified it like it were some vital component of his career in insurance. But let's be honest, the only thing he networked with was a sand wedge. Then came Tyler's gleaming 2022 Mercedes-Benz, the one he used to pick Jessica up. That monthly payment, $785.00, and yes, I was footing the bill. Jason's slightly older Audi, 2021 model, ran $675.00 each month. Add in the $3,200.00 repair bill I paid after he rammed into a mailbox while texting. All of it was on me. Every unexpected cost, every luxury, every indulgence. Designer bags? Mine. Spa weekends and Cancun getaways? Also mine. The champagne at New Year's and even the birthday cakes they posted about online with hashtags like blessed and grateful, paid by me. And yet, they had the nerve to mock me, mock my job, my car, my entire existence, like I was beneath them. That afternoon, I had to drop off some documents for Uncle Greg's insurance policy. No one was home, but I had a key. I'd been their emergency contact for years, because, of course, that was convenient for them. As I stepped into the house, now visibly undergoing a lavish renovation, I left the envelope in Greg's study and was about to head out when a stack of printed emails on his desk caught my eye. Curiosity overpowered me. The subject lines were all about a party, Tyler and Jessica's engagement celebration. I blinked at the screen. Engagement? After 2 months of dating? I read through the email thread and felt my stomach twist. It wasn't the engagement itself. It was the details. Everyone from their social circle was invited. Everyone but me. Diane had written that Jessica didn't want Ethan there. He might cause a scene. Greg responded with a plan to lie and tell me it was just a small gathering. I scrolled down. Tyler, in a rare moment of decency, questioned the exclusion. But he's still my cousin, he wrote. Greg shut that down immediately. Life's harsh. He'd embarrass us in front of Jessica's family. I had to read that line twice. Embarrass them, me, like I was some uncivilized outsider they were barely tolerating. As if I'd barge in yelling, covered in grease from the gas station. The insults weren't even subtle anymore. They were institutional. Next to the emails was a contractor's quote, $22,000, 0 cents for a luxury master bathroom renovation. Walk-in shower, marble counters, heated floors. Guess whose money was earmarked to pay for it? I left the house with my jaw clenched and my heart cold. I wasn't even angry at that point, just done. Completely done. Then the universe decided to sprinkle on one last insult. I got a text from Jessica that evening. Tyler told me you've been spreading lies about his family. Please stop. They've been nothing but generous to you. I stared at the word generous until it blurred on the screen. Generous. That's how they described their parasitic behavior? I didn't reply. There was no point. Instead, I made more calls. I scheduled appointments. The trust fund wasn't just a bottomless ATM. They'd forgotten that I managed it, not them. There were processes, legal protocols, steps I could take to restrict access, to reallocate funds, to slowly starve the leeches without triggering an instant war. I met again with my financial advisor. We laid out a timeline, put every step in writing, documented everything. Then, of course, came the phone call. Aunt Diane. Well, Ethan, we'd love for you to come over this week. There's something we'd really like to discuss. Tyler and Jessica will be here too. They have some big news. She said it like a bribe. The promise of seeing Jessica again would lure me in. I already knew what they were planning, but I agreed anyway. One final performance. Time to see it all unravel from the front row. I showed up at 6:00 p.m. sharp. Their driveway was full of contractor trucks. Inside, workers were installing an enormous crystal chandelier in the foyer. So, the renovation had already begun, without waiting for approval, of course. All based on the assumption that I'd keep funding the dream. "Ethan," Diane called out with that overly sweet tone she reserved for manipulating people. "Don't mind the mess. We're doing a little upgrading. You know how it is." She paused and added with a smirk, "Well, maybe you don't." He said nothing, just walked in. The whole gang was there. Jessica stood next to Tyler, dressed like she was ready to attend a gala. Her eyes met mine briefly before flicking away. Tyler's arm was looped around her waist, like he'd just won a prize at the county fair. Greg cornered me before we even sat down. "Listen, champ, we've all been a little worried about you. Your attitude lately, it's been throwing people off. You're acting jealous, and it's making things awkward." I looked him dead in the eye. He was wearing that golf polo again, the one I'd unknowingly paid for. And lecturing me about attitude? Dinner was catered, probably cost hundreds, if not more. But of course, the bill went to the same trust card they used for everything. I sat silently as they passed dishes and poured wine, everyone acting like nothing had changed. Then Diane tapped her glass and stood up. "We have an announcement," she declared, her voice high with false excitement. Tyler stood, pulling Jessica to her feet beside him. "We're engaged," he said with a wide grin, holding her hand high so everyone could see the oversized diamond ring on her finger. Applause erupted. Jessica looked around the room, radiant and smug. "You've all been so wonderful," she said. "You feel like the family I always dreamed of having." I took another bite of my food I was, yet again, paying for, and waited. Finally, Diane turned to me, voice thick with mock sympathy. "Ethan, honey, we know this might be a lot for you, but we think it's best if you don't come to the engagement party. Or the wedding, for that matter. It would just be awkward for Jessica." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At least he had the grace to look mildly ashamed. Jessica didn't look at me, not once. "The Williamsons will be there too," Uncle Greg chimed in smugly, slicing into his steak like the king of some imaginary empire. "Their daughter just got promoted to vice president at that investment firm downtown. We really can't have you showing up and telling your little gas station stories. It reflects poorly on all of us." I calmly took another bite of my food and looked up at him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Which stories would those be, Uncle Greg? The ones about how I manage a multi-million-dollar trust, or the ones about how I've been secretly paying your mortgage for the last 5 years?" The room froze. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat stop. All chatter died mid-sentence. Forks hung in the air. Glasses never made it back to the lips. "What are you talking about?" Aunt Diane snapped, her voice sharp and defensive, like she already knew. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, tapping a few times until my banking app opened. I held it up, the numbers glowing for everyone to see. "Let's look at the data, shall we? Want to start with the house payments, the car notes, or maybe that brand new chandelier I noticed on my way in?" Jason gave a strained laugh. "Mom, what's he talking about?" "He's obviously mistaken," Diane rushed out. "That money comes from the government, from the accident fund or whatever it was." I shook my head slowly, my voice flat. "There is no government fund. There never was. Every cent, every single transaction came from the trust my parents left behind. The one I manage. The one that's been quietly paying for all of this." Greg shoved his chair back and stood, red-faced. "Now you listen." "No," I said, my voice firmer now. "You listen. I've covered your lifestyle for 5 years. Your homes, your cars, your golf, your trips, everything." Tyler dropped his fork, stunned. Jessica's face went pale. Diane's face drained of color. "You're lying," she hissed. "You can't even afford gas for that junk heap you drive." I pulled out my phone and began calmly showing them the receipts. Literal, cold proof. Screenshots of payment confirmations, bank statements with monthly withdrawals, and credit card transactions linked directly to luxury purchases. I showed them everything. The engagement ring glinting on Jessica's finger, that had been charged to the family account just last week. The same card I'd paid off every month. The Bahamas wedding they were dreaming up, good luck covering that. As for the fancy bathroom remodel, I hoped the contractor had given them a refundable deposit, because that wasn't happening. The explosion was immediate. Screaming, yelling, accusations were flying like knives across the room. Aunt Diane, in her panic, knocked over her full glass of red wine, the contents seeping like blood into her pristine white tablecloth. Uncle Greg roared about calling lawyers, his face purpling with rage. Tyler stumbled through an explanation, trying to say something to Jessica, who looked like she was fighting the urge to vomit right there on the hardwood floor. Through it all, I sat there, calm, collected, still eating. They thrashed and flailed, like fish pulled from water, but eventually, like all storms, they wore themselves out. When the room finally fell quiet, except for Diane's ragged breathing, I stood. "Check your email tomorrow morning, all of you," I said, voice level and quiet. "Everything will be explained in writing, including your 60-day notice to begin making your own payments." Diane lunged for me, grabbing my forearm in desperation. "You can't do this to us, we're family." "Family?" I repeated, pulling my arm from her grasp. "Family doesn't belittle you, exclude you, or steal the only meaningful relationship you've had in years just to mock it afterward." Then I turned to Jessica. Her face had drained of color, lips parted slightly in shock. "You enjoyed the illusion, gold digger. Hope the ring was worth it. Shame about the wedding, though." I walked to the door, but turned around for one last word. "Oh, and that trash car I drive? It's paid off in full, unlike your cars, your house, or anything else you claim to own." Then I left them, all of them, screaming, crying, unraveling like the false life they'd built. Back home, I barely had time to sit before my phone lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Calls, texts, voicemails, everything from threats to tearful pleas. But I didn't flinch. Everything was ready. Documents filed, legal advice secured, boundaries drawn. At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, I hit send. The email went out to every single one of them. Attached were PDF documents meticulously detailing 5 years of financial transactions, payments, transfers, loan payoffs, charges, maintenance bills, insurance, and utilities. No explanations, no emotion, just cold, hard numbers. At the bottom was the final nail, an official legal notice that all financial support would terminate in exactly 60 days. No exceptions. I shut off my phone. I didn't wait for the chaos to start. I grabbed my keys and drove across town to a quiet little cafe I'd never visited before, ordered an espresso and sat by the window in complete peace. For 2 straight hours, I did nothing but sip coffee and breathe. No one is yelling my name. No one is mocking me. No one is using me. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I could actually exhale. When I turned my phone back on, it almost crashed from the flood of notifications. 63 missed calls, 214 texts, 43 messages on Facebook. It was chaos in digital form. The first to show up was Aunt Diane. She didn't knock, she pounded. "Ethan, open this door, right now." I opened it. She stormed in, her mascara streaking down her cheeks, waving her phone with the email open. "This is a joke, right? This has to be a joke." I barely looked at her. "Diane, tears don't pay mortgages. You should know that by now." Her eyes searched my face, looking for mercy. "You can't do this. We'll be ruined. The cars, the house, the credit cards. How are we supposed to survive?" "You have 60 days, I said flatly. "Find a way." She collapsed onto the arm of my couch, bawling. "We're family." I tilted my head. "Let's talk about family then. About calling me worthless. About mocking my job. About your son taking the one person I cared about and parading her around like a trophy." She shifted tactics instantly, desperation turning to performance. She tried to hug me. "We didn't know, Ethan. We're so sorry. We can change." "No, Diane. You won't change. The trust dissolves in 60 days. That's it. The show's over." Just then, Uncle Greg stormed into the room. Apparently, Diane had texted him my address. "You ungrateful little," he spat, taking a threatening step forward. I didn't move. One more step, and the payments stopped today, instead of in 60 days. He froze, his mouth opening and closing. The reality had finally sunk in. Then came the cousins. Jason slumped in, eyes wide. Tyler followed, looking like a man who'd been mugged in his own dream. "What about Jessica?" he kept asking. "What am I supposed to tell her?" I folded my arms. "Try the truth. Tell her you're a fraud living on borrowed money, and even that money just ran out." "But the engagement," he said, voice cracking. "The ring, she's going to leave me." I smirked. "Now you know what it feels like to lose something. Hurts, doesn't it?" He looked down, blinking fast, fists trembling. He had no comeback, nothing to say. The next few hours were sheer madness. Diane cried into my couch cushions. Greg paced, calling every contact he had from his golf club. Tyler hyperventilated in the corner. Jason stared into space, broken. Then my phone buzzed again. A new message. "Jessica. Is it true about the money?" I didn't even bother to type a reply. I just turned my phone toward Tyler and let him read it. He stared at the screen, then looked at me, defeated. What do I tell her? I shrugged. I don't care. That's your problem now. Diane made one final attempt. She stood, voice trembling with false sincerity. Your parents would be ashamed of you. The room stilled. I walked to my bedroom and returned with a thin folder. Inside were letters handwritten by my parents before they passed, outlining how the trust was to be used. For medical bills, for education, for emergencies. Not for luxury cars, beach resorts, and chandelier upgrades. I handed the folder to Diane. No, they'd be ashamed of you. I let the silence stretch as they read every word on those printed pages, every clause, every instruction, from my parents in their own handwriting, and then I finally spoke, calm but unflinching. My parents spent their whole lives building something real. They didn't leave behind wealth so it could fund ego trips, new cars, or pay for chandeliers and golf clubs. They set this trust up to support family in genuine need, emergencies, education, health, not to bankroll entitled moochers playing pretend. You want to talk about shame? They'd be ashamed of you. Diane just crumbled. That time the tears weren't performative. Her whole body folded in on itself as she sobbed, hands shaking, mascara already streaked across her cheeks. There were no comebacks, no more lies to spin. She had finally hit the wall. She barely made it home before the ripple effects of my email began hitting them like waves. The chandelier company called first. Apparently that imported piece of overpriced glass and polished metal, an investment Diane insisted they needed to elevate the foyer, hadn't been paid in full. The final check? It bounced. Hard. By morning, a truck rolled into the driveway. The same workers who had installed the glitzy centerpiece returned and took it down, piece by shimmering piece. Greg got hit next. His sacred golf club, the one where he strutted around pretending to be some mogul, revoked his membership. Turns out, skipping dues for 2 months while racking up tabs at the bar doesn't sit well with rich people pretending to be richer. But nothing compared to Tyler's implosion. His picture-perfect engagement with Jessica? Obliterated. He had no choice but to sit her down and confess that his lifestyle was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion, a life powered by someone else's inheritance. Jessica, bless her naive heart, had assumed his wealth came from a successful law career, not a trust fund managed by the very cousin she'd dismissed. She hadn't even known the money existed until it disappeared. Poof. The engagement party was canceled. The dream wedding in the Bahamas, never happening. The diamond ring, probably sitting in a drawer or on Craigslist. I heard all this from Jason. Surprisingly, he'd developed a conscience through all this. Maybe seeing the collapse from the inside changed him. He never fought me on the fallout. Didn't whine or threaten. He just vanished for a bit. And honestly, I respected that. Meanwhile, Diane and Greg were scrambling. Desperation doesn't look good on people who've lived above their means for half a decade. They tried to refinance the house. Yes, my house, technically, for the past 5 years. But their credit was garbage. Years of maxed out cards, bad habits, and living like royalty on a peasant's budget came back to bite them. Hard. 2 weeks later, I happened to drive by the house in my supposedly trash Honda. Diane was outside in her robe, arms crossed, silently watching as workers carted off the now empty chandelier box. She didn't notice me. Or maybe she did, and just couldn't bear to look. Either way, I didn't feel a single pang of guilt. Because while her world crumbled, I was building mine. I'd just moved into my parents' old house, the cozy one they owned before they upgraded to the family estate, the one with warmth, history, and memories. It wasn't flashy, but it had heart. I paid for it in full. No mortgage, no debt, no leeches. It was mine now, and I had finally started living my life. It's been 7 months since I cut them all off. 7 months since I stopped bleeding money for people who couldn't be bothered to treat me like a human being. And let me tell you, it feels amazing. I quit the gas station job. No more midnight shifts. No more belligerent drunks asking for smokes or lottery tickets. The day I clocked out for the last time, I didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look over my shoulder. That job had served its purpose. It was never meant to be forever. It was just a way to keep the lights on while the trust fund paid for other people's illusions. But now that I wasn't supporting their fantasies, I had room to build something real. Cars. I've always been good with cars. My dad taught me as a kid how to rotate tires, swap out brake pads, and change oil. It wasn't just a hobby. It was problem solving. It was getting your hands dirty and making something broken run again. So I took what remained of the trust part I hadn't spent on freeloaders, and invested it. I opened a garage, just me at first. A single bay, a used hydraulic lift, a dented toolbox, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Honest Mechanic." I picked that name because after years of dealing with liars, my family, I realized people crave honesty more than anything else. The business blew up. Within 2 months, I couldn't keep up with appointments. Word spread that I didn't upsell unnecessary repairs or screw people over. I hired 2 guys to help, and within 4 months, we were turning a profit. My financial advisor said it was rare to see a return that fast. But then again, I'd never been typical. That's when Vanessa came in. I needed someone to manage the front, answer calls, book appointments, wrangle vendors, shield me from people who panic when their tire pressure light comes on. Vanessa was perfect. Mid-20s, whip-smart, and yes, absolutely gorgeous. But more than that, she ran things. She didn't flirt, she didn't try to angle herself into my wallet. She took command of that office like she'd owned it for years. Customers love her, my crew listens to her, and me, I respect her. We talk like partners, like equals. Not once has she made me feel like a stepping stone. If anything were to ever happen between us, big if. At least, I'd know it wasn't because of money. It'd be because she saw value in me. These days, I wake up in my own home, get into my paid-off car, and head to a business I built from the ground up. I fix things. Real things. While the people who once mocked me are still scrambling for answers. Uncle Greg lost the house first. Couldn't refinance. Couldn't cover back payments. The bank took it without ceremony. I heard from someone that he's working part-time now at a hardware store. I actually ran into him once while I was buying supplies for the shop. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. He saw me, locked eyes from across the hardware aisle, then instantly looked away and turned around. Greg didn't say a word, just walked the other way, like a ghost, dodging judgment. No swagger, no smugness, just a man who had finally been brought down to earth. But if Greg's shame was quiet, Diane's fall from grace was the loudest silence imaginable. She'd built her identity around status, crisp suits, designer heels, lunchtime mimosas, and her place as queen bee among the neighborhood wives. That illusion shattered. Now she works as a receptionist at a dental office. Yep, from fancy handbags and champagne brunches to insurance forms and appointment reminders. No more manicures, no more boutique shopping, just 9 to 5s, stiff uniforms, and phone calls about cavities. I see her sometimes, waiting at the bus stop on Main Street, her once perfect posture now slouched under the weight of real life. She keeps her eyes down when I drive past. She knows. Jason, though, I'll give credit where it's due. He took the fall like a man, didn't throw a tantrum or beg for bailouts. Instead, he used it as a wake-up call. Enrolled in community college, working toward an associate's degree in accounting. A few months ago, he even texted me, "You were right about everything. I was blind. I'm sorry." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I wasn't ready. Maybe one day, but not then. Tyler, his crash was the loudest. The golden boy, the showboat, the liar, the one who built his image on borrowed wealth and name-dropping fake connections. Once the money vanished, people started to talk, and the cracks in his perfect persona spread fast. His law firm started poking around after a few clients raised red flags. Half the accounts he bragged about, fabricated or exaggerated. When the truth surfaced, they fired him on the spot. Now he's tending bar at a trendy downtown spot, living with 2 roommates in a cramped 2-bedroom. The BMW he flaunted like a badge of honor, repossessed 3 months after I pulled the plug. It didn't take long for the house of cards to fall. Jessica dumped him shortly after the engagement party was canceled. I wasn't surprised. Turns out for richer or poorer was more of a suggestion than a commitment. She moved back in with her parents and deleted most of her social media presence. Apparently, upgrading her taste in men didn't go quite as planned. The only communication I got from the family after the fallout was a Christmas card from Diane. Generic and unsigned, and a birthday text from Jason. That was it. And honestly, that's all I needed. Some relationships aren't meant to be revived. You bury them and keep walking. But not everyone stayed buried. 2 months after everything went nuclear, Jessica walked into my shop. No text, no warning, no appointment. Just waltzed in like we were still on speaking terms. She looked around the garage, took in the polished floors, the updated signage, and the bustle of real work being done. Her gaze lingered on the clean walls, the quiet hum of business. It wasn't the gas station anymore. This wasn't the Ethan she left behind. "Your place looks great," she said, voice tentative. I didn't stop wrenching the air filter loose from the Mustang I was working on. Didn't even look up. I wanted to talk, she continued, stepping closer. Maybe explain my side of things. That made me pause. I looked up. She wasn't dressed like before. No designer bag, no salon curls, no gold watch. Just jeans, sneakers, a faded t-shirt, and a look of uncertainty. Your side? I asked, eyes narrowing. You ghosted me after one dinner, ran off with my cousin, got engaged to him in record time and vanished. What part exactly needs explaining? She swallowed, eyes darting around. I made a mistake. No kidding, I said flatly, turning back to the car. Tyler, he seemed so put together. Confident. Your family made it sound like you had no future. She was scrambling. I was shallow, I know that now. Yeah, I replied. You were. Her eyes searched mine, probably hoping for sympathy, for comfort. I gave her none. I miss you, she said softly. The way things were. Us. The simple dates. The honest talks. I chuckled dryly. You miss me now that you know I have money. That's not fair, she started. You didn't know about the money, I cut in. Fine, but you knew me, and that should have been enough. She blinked, caught off guard. Her eyes welled, but not convincingly. There was calculation behind that sadness. And we just start over? Before I could respond, Vanessa leaned into the garage from the front office. Clipboard in hand, she gave me a sharp, efficient nod. Hey boss, Mustang clients here. Want me to take care of it? Jessica's entire demeanor shifted. Her eyes flicked to Vanessa, smartly dressed, confident, totally at ease. She hadn't noticed her before, but now she realized. This wasn't a gas station anymore. This wasn't desperate, Ethan clinging to his job and praying for scraps of validation. This was someone else entirely. Nah, I said, standing tall and wiping my hands on a rag. I don't do charity cases, Jessica. Not even for old time's sake. The smirk she came in with faded. She looked at Vanessa again, then back at me. For a brief moment I saw realization settle in. The man she tossed aside had been replaced, upgraded, not just with someone prettier or smarter, but someone real. You don't mean that, she said quietly. I smiled without warmth. Yeah, I do. She turned away slowly. For the first time since I met her, Jessica didn't have anything to say. She left without a word. I didn't watch her go. I had work to do. If there's one thing this whole mess taught me, it's this. Don't set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. Burnout isn't noble. It's just destruction. Now I wake up every morning in a home I own, head to a business I built, and answer to no one but myself. No more fake smiles, no more toxic dinners, no more begging to be seen. Am I happy? Yeah. Not the filtered, #blessed kind of happy. Not the photoshopped vacation kind. The quiet, content kind. The one that lets you sleep at night because you know you made the right choices, even if they were hard. Someone once asked if I'd ever help my family again if they were on the verge of homelessness. Honestly, I don't know, maybe. But if I did, it would come with boundaries as thick as concrete walls, because I'll never go back to being the guy who gave until there was nothing left. I'm not him anymore.